Okay, we're getting ready to start again. So everyone come back in, relax. And it's my honor to introduce the president of USC, Byung Kim, who is conducting an open dialogue project on campus, which is so consistent with what we've tried to do at the Center for the Political Future. I'm honored to introduce him. Mr. President.
Thank you, Bob. You are truly a legend, and we're so grateful for your support of this conference and for everything you do at USC. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. As Bob said, my name is Beong Kim. I'm the interim president of USC, and it is such a privilege to be here with all of you today. I wasn't able to attend this morning's sessions, but I understand you heard from some amazingly vigorous, passionate speakers, and I know that this afternoon promises to bring the same. This is really such an amazing event every single year. I was able to attend most of it last year. The way that it brings together so many different minds, bipartisan, intergenerational, interdisciplinary. And it's a privilege to be here because this conference and the work of the Center for the Political Future embody the civic engagement, open dialogue, and constructive discourse that Bob indicated is a focus of mine and that we're trying to cultivate here at USC. We've always prided ourselves on being a pluralistic community, pluralistic in the sense that our students, our faculty, and staff represent every single background, religion, part of the world. But we also pride ourselves on being a place where people with different viewpoints, different opinions, different ideas can come together and learn from each other with mutual respect and emerge smarter. Because let's not forget, the goal of a university is to make everyone smarter. It's not to vanquish your ideological opponents. It's to learn and to do things together. In recent times, I think it's not a secret that it's been difficult having difficult conversations at universities. And that's why, as Bob indicated, we've created at USC the Open Dialogue Project, which puts our principles into practice by helping students and faculty develop the skills to communicate across differences and respectfully disagree with each other. And I'm proud that the CFP is very much a part of this initiative, as is Kami, the director. I hear you're somewhere out there, Kami. And the skills that we're trying to develop through the Open Dialogue Project are absolutely critical. They're critical to truth-seeking, which is, of course, the goal of the Academy. They're critical to preparing our students to enter into professional lives and careers where they're going to need to get things done with people with very different backgrounds and different perspectives and ideas. And they're critically important to maintaining the health of our democracy. We're committed not just to inculcating these kinds of values and skills, but also studying them. Over the last few months, we established the Center for Civic Society at the USC Schaefer Institute, which is focusing on bridging political divides, restoring civic trust through rigorous nonpartisan research. And this center will join the Schwarzenegger Institute, the Center for Inclusive Democracy, and other faculty across USC that are working on these issues that are so critical to our democracy. I know that you've had some great conversations this morning, and there's more to come this afternoon. A conference like this does more than examine the state of our politics, though. It strengthens the habits that keep our democracy healthy. The questions you're asking, the debates you're weighing, the experiences you're sharing, these all contribute to a deeper understanding of where our democracy stands now and here. You're not just talking about our democratic system, though. You're actually modeling it and participating in it. You're bringing together people across generations and perspectives. You're helping us strengthen USC's commitment to civic engagement and open dialogue. And you're creating more of the democratic discourse, respectful democratic discourse that our nation desperately needs today. So thank you all for taking the time to be here. Please enjoy the rest of the conference. And I see Alex in the back of the room. Alex, are you next? One of our great alums Alex is going to be moderating this next panel. It's wonderful to have you here.
This session is about, and I'm Elex Michaelson, by the way. For many years, I was on ABC 7 and Fox 11. I now host a brand new show on CNN, their first primetime show in the West since Larry King Live. It's on from 9 to 11 o'clock Pacific time every night from Burbank, and I'd appreciate it if you'd watch. Okay, that's enough. Enough self-promotion, but it's great to be doing it, and it often features a lot of our favorites here, including Mike Murphy and Bob, and hopefully I'll book some of these panelists while I'm here because I never stop working. But this assignment today, this panel is focused on this question of the state of our democracy. There was one candidate who talked about this battle for the soul of our democracy and the soul of our country. And I think right now, we often sort of assess the state of the union is blank. So we'll go down the list and sort of each of you, if you don't mind, the state of our democracy is what right now? Mike.
State of our democracy is in trouble and coming back. That's where it is.
Expand.
Well, I think it's under great threat. It's under threat for lots of reasons, primarily because the president is put it under threat, and we have a cooperative court that seems to be prepared to assist him. And there's a systematic assault on the institutions of the country, which, whether it be the press, the Congress, courts, the universities, they're all being challenged. And I don't think the president hid the ball. He said that's what he was going to do. And he's doing it. He has a view of the presidency, which is that it is unfettered and unlimited in its power. And he's trying to bring that to bear. I also think that the country is witnessing, it's living through something which it was hard for them to accept and believe was going to happen. And it's happening. And so the reaction, I think, is encouraging. I know there's always a lot of focus on things like affordability and the economy and that sort of thing. But what people protest in America is the loss of their rights and the loss of their standing and their freedom. And I think it's a much more powerful force in the electorate and among the public than the leadership of the parties understand. And so I think there's a whole effort underway in the country which is eluding most of the conversation, which is being driven by fundamental concerns about people who don't want to lose their freedom, don't want to see the loss of their democracy. So it's an action. So I think it's, maybe it's predictable in a sense that it was finally going to take the actual assault on the democracy to produce the actual response. But I think it's happening. I think it's encouraging.
Professor, the state of our democracy is?
The state of our democracy is under stress, but it's always been under stress. I think it's important to, and most of my research always involves history. It's a historical approach, right? So I cover hundreds of years of history, and I think we're accustomed to thinking that the current situation is special. And the current situation sometimes is the worst that we could potentially have. I mean, listening to Congressman Gephardt today, I think he would probably appreciate that in the late 70s and early 80s, there were people who were saying, it's just not like it was in the 60s, just not like it was in the 50s, right? It's not to say that there aren't problems and that we shouldn't be concerned and that we shouldn't focus on these things, and that maybe there are more problems or bigger problems than in other eras. But there's a lot to be positive about in the United States and in our democracy.
So for people that say we've never been more divided than we are right now, as somebody who studies the Civil War, would you say we were more divided back then?
650,000 deaths later, I would say so.
Yeah. Mr. Patterson, the state of our democracy is.
I take a somewhat more dire view of this. I think we're on the precipice of what they call hungry competitive authoritarianism. I think we had a belief that guardrails were some abstraction, and guardrails are really only people. Guardrails are really only voters and the officials that they elect to uphold them. And if they cease to do that, as Congress has ceased to do, by and large, the Supreme Court has actually facilitated Trump in many ways. So I think we've discovered how fragile we are. And I agree that there are other periods in history which have been grim, but Civil War was fought on behalf of democracy and against the racial autocracy. And the threat to democracy here is much more abstract. In some ways, I think people don't necessarily feel it in their daily lives a lot. But meanwhile, Trump is running amok. I guess I would say also that I think one of the reasons that we got here is because over the last 40, 50 years, there's been a dramatic shift in wealth upwards. And so we have a lot more vulnerable people who are angry and frustrated and feel like they've lost the American dream. So the big challenge here, I think, is not only how do we restore the American dream in reality, but also in belief. But how do we make it more equitable than it ever has been? So I think we're facing grave challenges. I certainly don't know the answer. I mean, but I do think that in addition to worrying about democracy, which is still an abstraction to a lot of people who are like just going their day-to-day lives, we need to worry about how we really improve the day-to-day lives of more and more people who over the last 40, 50 years have found themselves in a very marginal and precarious place compared to what their expectations would have been.
Yeah, and to your point, a lot of the trust in the institutions have gone down because so many people feel so hopeless, right?
Very much.
That they feel like the institutions aren't serving them.
Very much. If you look at the years from 2000 to 2010, America was a different place at the end of that decade because we had Bush versus Gore, which was sort of political decision. Then we had the Iraq War. Then we had the Bush tax cuts, which reversed the more prudent policies in the 90s that we were talking about before. We had the financial crisis of 2008. We had the rise of the Tea Party. We had the accession of John Roberts as sort of an accidental Chief Justice. And then we had the in 2010 Citizens United ruling. So I think we were right then, we were a much more well placed in 2010 than we were in 2000. And it sort of set the stage for the Tea Party, Trumpism. Herman Cain is a credible presidential candidate for some people. I mean, and so it's like Herman Cain, FDR. I do think that the stage has been laid for Donald Trump. He was not a surprise in that sense.
And for people that are my age, my generation that came of age during that time, that was the time that I was here, the government was seen as lying over and over again on time and time again. And so then for those of us Republicans and Democrats, there's less of a trust in institutions because it felt like the government let us down in a lot of situations as we came of age. Ed Goeas, your thoughts as a Republican here on the state of our democracy?
I'm gonna do something a little bit different. I'll give you a little bit of my background in getting involved in politics. I grew up an Army brat. My father was from Hawaii. He was walking home after serving Mass one Sunday and saw the smoke coming out from Pearl Harbor. And from that day on, he wanted to go in the military, which he did, and went to Vietnam and Korea. Towards the end of his career, he had won 3 Bronze Stars, and he died at 61 of Agent Orange. And his last words to me was, "You have to talk to your mom because she keeps calling Congress complaining about Agent Orange. I went to Vietnam willing to give my life, and the fact that Vietnam took my life ignores the fact I was blessed with 25 more years with all of you when I came home." I use that to kind of say, I think the big mistake we in politics make is we try to put in groups people as opposed to understanding everyone has their own individual story. And how do you appeal to that story? I worked my first campaign in 1964 when I was 11 years old. My father went to Vietnam. I was the oldest of 4 boys. He pulled me on the tarmac and said, "I've raised you not to be a bully, and I'm going to fight for a country that's being bullied by another country." I think of that often when I take the position I do on Donald Trump. It was something that was taught to me to be against bullies from the very beginning. And he is certainly a bully in terms of the way he tries to govern. I think our problem with the democracy is in deep trouble. I think it's in deep trouble for a different reason than what people think. Number one is that 30 years of negative campaigning in this country has driven down the trust in every institution in this country, with the exception of maybe the military. But certainly the police, education, healthcare, you pick an institution in this country, and it's at an all-time low of trust. And that becomes a fertile ground for negative campaigns to keep going. And you can talk about this group feels disenfranchised, or this group feels this, or this group feels that. Something I never understood, and I always took an issue with many of the other consultants out there. If all both sides do is talk about what they're against, all we're doing is teaching those groups what to be against. Until we get our campaigns running positive campaigns about what we're for, our politicians are not going to educate us on what to be for. And that's where we are today.
But is the reason that they're doing that because they work? I mean, you look at a situation like here in California, Gavin Newsom just ran Proposition 50. He almost said nothing about redistricting. It was all about Trump sucks. Look at what's happening with the National Guard. Look at what's happening on immigration. If you want to give a middle finger to Trump, give a middle finger to Trump with Prop 50. When he was running against the recall, when they were trying to recall him, he said, Trump sucks. Look at what's happening with COVID vaccines. And he wins big. Almost no talk about the actual issues, no talk about a positive record in California, all about the other side sucks, and it wins.
But what he did is he ran a negative campaign.
Right.
And so he put issues out there that educated those people to be against that, not to be for or why to be for the redistricting and the positive. And so, that is part of the problem. The other problem that comes from the negatives is that, again, we're not building trust in government. We're not building trust in our politicians by the campaigns we run. But a lot of people have said over the years to me, we run negative campaigns because it works.
Right. It's like, why did local news cover car chases?
My response to that...
Because they get good ratings.
My response to that is so does positive campaigns. You ought to try it once in a while.
Yeah. And you have an example of that.
Well, I can tell you someone that always ran a positive campaign. James Lankford, senator in Oklahoma, ran a positive campaign to the point that not only was his opponent running negative spots against him and the opponent's super PAC running negatives against him, Lankford's super PAC thought we weren't getting the job done, so they ran negative campaigns. One of the things I think we do need to do is bring what the campaigns are doing back to just the campaign. And I don't know how we get there, but we have to kind of think through doing that. So, I think we're in trouble. I think that one of the things that in the book that I wrote, we wanted to have hope as the last chapter. And the hope that we saw in the data was young people. And yet we went and did interviews with 400 different young people, by age, by race, by education. Every one of those 400 said the same thing. I will respect someone else if they respect me first. The world doesn't work that way, but that's what we've taught them. And at some point, we have to teach them, show respect, and you'll have a much different kind of world. And I think the answer to that we finally came to is we need people to inspire them to trust and to believe in the system. But we have no one out there doing it now because all they're doing is talking down the system as opposed to talking up the system.
Yeah. So there's been so much talk about the last campaign, presidential campaign. Everybody has sort of shared their perspective. Kamala Harris has a book out. There's all these reporters with a book out. We haven't really heard your perspective or President Biden's perspective. And so much has been said about you and about your role in terms of advising him and his decision to run in the first place. And I'm curious if you want to take this opportunity to sort of share your perspective or maybe some of the misconceptions that are out there about you or President Biden and his thinking in terms of running again and messaging the way that you did.
Me.
You, yes. Yeah.
I don't know who we're talking about.
Do you want them to take that one?
That wasn't mine.
About the last election. Well, look, I have spoken about it. Obviously, I guess not a lot of people have heard about it. That's okay.
Yeah.
Look, my view about the last election was I thought it was I thought the Democratic Party lost its mind. That's what I thought.
The Democratic Party lost
Yes.
its mind. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is I thought that Joe Biden was the best candidate. I thought he was the most likely person to be elected president. I thought he would be the best president. There was a perception about Biden out of the last campaign that he couldn't win. You may not believe it, but it's true. On the day he got out of the race, he was behind Trump by 3 points. Okay, it's the first margin of error presidency that was decided to be over in history. Secondly, there was a perception that he couldn't do the job. And so, there are books written about how he couldn't do his job. No one can point to a moment in the Biden presidency when he failed to do his job as president. You can't point to a single moment that his supposed infirmaries prevented him from doing his job as president. Government never shut down. Ukraine was funded. Job creation in his last 2 months in office was over 500,000 jobs. One of the things I did with President Biden was I helped to write a lot of his speeches. In 2 weeks before his debate, which was supposedly so decisive, I thought he gave some of the best speeches he ever gave at Normandy and at Pointe du Hoc on the role of democracy and what was at stake in the country and the world. So look, my view was, there had been 3 people who've run against Donald Trump. Joe Biden's the only person who ever beat him. My argument in 2024 was that Joe Biden had won the presidency by 7 million votes in 2020. He got more votes than anybody in the history of this country. He still has gotten more votes than anybody who ever ran for president has ever gotten. He got 81 million votes. So the idea that his age was preventing him from doing his job was not true. That he was a weaker candidate, I don't think is true. And I thought, I thought about something that Tad said, which I don't think gets a lot of attention. Okay. In 2020, there was a Democratic nomination for president. Joe Biden won it. And in my mind, the Democratic leadership and the biggest donors to the party made a decision that was at odds with the Democratic primary voters in America who chose Joe Biden to be the nominee for the Democratic Party. And so then in the end, Biden actually did what I think has been forgotten, which was that he made a decision he would not lead a divided party. And since then, he has taken unrelenting criticism, having made the decision to put the party before himself. But there's just certain facts that people can't get around. And one of them is there's only one person ever who has beaten Donald Trump in this country, ever. Okay? And I'll make another prediction. Very, very soon, people are going to look back on the Biden presidency. One of the things that's going to amaze people is that he might be the last great job creation president for a long time in this country. Because AI is about to decimate this economy. And so I just think I thought what happened in the party was, I thought it was disloyal. I thought it was an act of betrayal against the president. I thought it was undemocratic because it didn't respect the will of Democratic primary voters. And I thought it was politically stupid. Because I think the idea that you can create a campaign in the middle of a summer, a few weeks before a convention, and run a nominee was not a smart decision. Even though, look, I believe then, I believe now. One of the things that I think is I don't think she gets enough credit for is I thought Harris ran a really good race. Okay? She lost a competitive race. This notion that she couldn't win is just not true. She was ahead in the polls the day she entered the race. She was ahead in the polls in September and October. She was ahead in the polls going into Election Day. And the story that gets written is how she didn't have a shot. So I think there's a lot about the election which isn't true. Obviously, I have a different point of view. I understand I probably have a minority view in this room. That's my view.
So you think that after that debate,
Yeah.
with the poll numbers of Americans on both parties concerned about President Biden's age, concerned about the idea of an 86-year-old president, you still think he would have won?
This is what I think. You go back and look at the polling at the moment, okay? And I think you'll be surprised by a few things. Biden went into that debate roughly 2 points down nationwide. The race got closer in the days after the debate. It didn't get wider.
So why did he drop out then?
He dropped out because the Democratic leadership and the biggest Democratic donors in America made a decision that he could not win. And there was a huge fight that then ensued, which created a huge split in the party, which Joe Biden said, I won't lead a divided party. Okay? I will lead a united party. One of the reasons we won in 20 as opposed to 16 was because in 20, the party was united. And in 24, it was united. I mean, people forget, Joe Biden got 87% of the vote in the Democratic primary. Now, people say, well, it wasn't a real primary. Right? It wasn't, right? Now, the truth is, anyone could have run. Does anyone really think that the people who thought about running didn't look about running?
Gavin Newsom certainly did.
They all looked at running. And do you know why they decided not to run?
Because they thought
Because they couldn't beat Joe Biden.
Yeah.
That's why. The decision was not, I don't want the presidency, right? The decision was, we can't beat him. So if you can't beat him, how weak is he? So look,
you think it was a mistake for him to drop out?
I don't think it was a mistake. I think it was a mistake for the party to have a circular firing squad. That's what I think, right? Yeah. I think if the party had not broken with Biden in the weeks after the debate, I think he could have survived the debate. One thing to be interesting for people to do is, like, I've looked at this debate a lot. I don't know if people have gone back and read it and looked at it. I have. Okay. What cost Biden his presidency was 20 seconds in that debate.
You think that's it?
20 seconds. I think from the moment the question was asked about the deficit to the moment he said, we've gone after Medicare, that is 20 seconds. And in those 20 seconds, it confirmed every fear that people had about him. So if you just want to ask from an analytical point of view, okay? The facts are, in the days after the debate, the race did not break against Joe Biden with the voters. That is not true. Okay? In the days after the debate, the campaign did polls in the battleground states. It was a dead heat race. The night of the debate, the campaign conducted focus group research with swing voters, which showed more swing voters moving to Biden after that debate than against him. Okay? Now, why? Because what the voters saw was a debate. And they saw Biden was old, and they were worried about how old he was. But they also saw Trump. And they were really worried about what he said about January 6th and how he wouldn't answer questions forthrightly. And his temperament and his character troubled them. So when they made an assessment about the debate they saw, more swing voters moved towards Biden than to Trump. Now, then you have a separate world. And the separate world is the conversation about the campaign. And that conversation was disastrous for Biden. Every person who went on CNN, every person who went on MSNBC, every person who went on Fox, it's over, he can't do it, he's out of it.
Nancy Pelosi hasn't made a decision yet.
Well,
Even though he's made a decision.
Yeah. Well, but look, Biden made a decision for about 3 weeks after the debate where he said, I'm running. And people like Pelosi and others kept saying, we're waiting for him to make a decision.
Right.
Well, he just didn't make the decision they wanted him to make.
Yeah. Ed, do you have a different view on this?
No, actually, I want to say some things to support it. People forget, and not, I'm always having to say, pay attention to what's in front of you. Don't make it up as you're going through. In this last election, Harris got 5 million votes less than Biden did.
Why do you think that is?
I'll come back to that. In this election, Donald Trump got 2 million more than he did. That made up the 7 million margin. And the data that I've looked at, there is no evidence that the 2 million that voted for Trump came from the 5 million that voted for Biden but didn't vote for Harris.
Meaning Biden voters stayed home and Trump brought new people to the table.
And basically what Trump did was that Trump took get out the vote, voter ID and get out the vote away from the party, had them do ballot security so that they could play that whole image game out there. And he went after young Republicans that had not voted before. And he turned them out. And he did it in all 50 states. He didn't do it in just the target states. And so that's the difference in the campaign. It's also a warning sign I'm trying to give to Republicans that if you think the Trump vote is going to save us in the off-year election, you better be paying a lot of attention to the 5 million that voted for Biden but didn't vote, and because they may come back in a huge amount. But the real thing in the data that everyone kind of misses, there's two things. One is that if you look at the vote for Trump or the election, he was saying, I won the biggest election ever. And I would differ a little bit that Ronald Reagan was actually the biggest election ever. He got 59% of the vote and won 49 states.
Yeah.
That in looking at the total electorate, 35% of the electorate voted for Trump. 34% of the electorate voted for Harris, and 31% stayed home because they couldn't vote for either one of them.
Right.
That's going to be the issue in the off-year election. That's going to be the issue in the next presidential election. But it supports very much what's being said.
And Richard, there was a lot talked about this idea of democracy initially, but it seemed in the closing days of the campaign, there was a lot more talked about this issue of affordability and of prices. Do you think that this idea of the democracy is something that actually drives the average person? Or as Mike talked about with David Axelrod, if you can't pay for the food on your table?
I would say day-to-day concerns about child care, the cost of things, health care, whether I can afford rent, whether I can buy a house. The things that people sort of go from trench to trench of life is typically defining these things. I will say whereas I think democracy, regrettably, is an abstraction to a lot of people, they are reacting to Trump's overbearing disrespect for virtually everything that we're used to observing. So I think, that he is a disturbed enough figure on the political scene that people are experiencing a sense of something slipping away. Briefly on the whole question of the election, I mean, I really do think that Democrats need a whole new generation of people. And I was someone who wrote in the first 2 years of Biden's presidency that he had a chance of being seen by historians as the best president since FDR. I also think that having chosen to run at 78, which is the average age of death for an American, and to look forward to serving till 86 did create a zone of discomfort in which this debate happened. And I think if I were going to rewrite history, I would have President Biden stick to what he intimated, that he was a bridge between generations, and a one-term president after the midterms in 2022. And then we would have had an orderly competition among Democrats. The notion that we could gin up some sort of phony primary after the president dropped out was, to me, less a sign of anything real, because there's never going to be such a process, as it was a sign of great lack of confidence in Kamala Harris to be able to go to the finish line.
Mike, do you want to respond to what he said?
Well, just two things quickly. I don't know, Professor, did you want to? One, look, it's not a secret. I believed in 2024 that the Democrats should have run a campaign on democracy in January 6th. That's what I believed. I thought the tagline for the Biden campaign was "For freedom, for democracy, for America." He announced for president at Valley Forge, and he said, the fundamental question in 2024 is whether democracy is still the sacred cause for America. Okay? And I believed that it was a voting issue. The party didn't. And I think it was a huge mistake at the end that it had a kind of a schizophrenic campaign between talking about democracy and talking about the economy. One of the things I thought was interesting about the 24 election was I always thought the moments of greatest advantage for the Democrats and the moments of greatest disadvantage for Trump was when the debate moved especially to January 6th, because he was incapable of not engaging the conversation, and he was incapable of doing anything except talking about pardoning people and how it was a patriotic day of peace. I thought that's where we should have had the campaign. And I think it is a tragedy that the 2024 election was not about January 6th. One other thing I just want to say, just to talk about this bridge notion, because, Biden gets hit with this a lot about how he said he'd be a bridge president and one-term president. We can debate whether he said it, but here's what I think is missed about Joe Biden.
Well, he said he was going to be a bridge. He didn't say he was going to be a one-term president.
But here's what I think is missed
Right.
about Biden as a bridge president, right? The way that is commonly understood is, I'm an old guy and there'll be a younger person to follow, right? That's kind of the, right? But now, and by the way, your point about another generation to come through is a healthy thing. Here's where I think people missed the boat on Biden being a bridge. I thought what Biden was a bridge between an America that is falling away, older, more white, and an America that's coming. And that he had an ability to bridge that America that no one else did. And one last thing I'll say on this point is, one thing that I think the Democrats failed to understand in 24 was that in addition to being a bridge between a part of the country that's very comfortable with Trump, also had a comfort level with Biden. he also had an incredibly progressive presidency. And he was, though, there's lots of debates about what the 24 election was really about. My own view is I think the economic portion of the campaign was substantially smaller than is generally given credit for. Okay? Think of it this way. I thought Biden was a heat shield. The idea that somebody was going to run against Joe Biden as a woke warrior, I thought was ridiculous.
It didn't work in 2020.
But there's no question that in 2024, a central piece of the 24 Trump campaign was an attack on, quote, a woke America. I mean, you could talk about how Trump ran on the economy in 24. If that's true, why has he spent all his money attacking Kamala Harris on transgender rights in the last month?
So are you suggesting that the older white guy from Pennsylvania was not as much at risk of that as the younger female African-American from Oakland? That this idea that people were more concerned about the woke issue with her than might have been with Biden?
Well, I think there's two different things. One is I thought Biden had an ability to bridge a divide in the country that almost no one else did. And secondly, I think the biggest problem that the vice president had was she had to get known really fast. And that's really hard to do. I don't think the problem with like a 100-day campaign was running a campaign. The problem with the 100-day campaign is getting the country comfortable with the idea of someone who they're only focusing on for a few months. I think that's where her getting to the comfort level she needed to with the country was just hard to do. And that's one of the things I had a lot of conversations with Democrats in the summer about Biden. And I said, look, like it or not, one thing, here's what we know about Biden. Everything Trump is going to say about him, they've already said. Whoever the nominee is, whoever it is going to be a new candidate in the middle of a firestorm. And that's a lot to get done fast.
Right. And Richard's argument was then if he would have not run 2 years earlier, then that person would have had more time to get that.
Well, except, I do have to say this, one other thing, just this notion, the Biden shouldn't have run 2 years ago. It would have been, there's this notion out there that if the party had just had a regular nomination process, right, that we would have had this great new candidate. I think the history of primaries is the most likely thing we would have had is a damaged candidate. That someone would have come through a very difficult, messy fight. Now, you can look at 2008 and say, well, that was great. That worked great for Obama. I don't think you can point to another nomination fight where whoever got the nomination was better off having gone through the fight.
Bill Clinton?
Certainly not.
Yeah.
Certainly not. The idea, Bill Clinton came out of his Democratic primary in third place behind Bush and Perot.
Yeah.
His favorable rating was 24% in the country.
Yeah.
Right? The idea that he was helped by his primary,
Yeah.
I just think is just not borne up by the data.
Professor, let's get you in here, unless you want to weigh in on this drama. But just as the historian who studies sort of the bigger picture concepts of democracy, which is what this panel was about, what are some of the key lessons you think we can learn from history when you look at some of the lessons you've studied over the years that you think are most helpful, most germane to this particular moment?
Well, I keep coming back to some of the points that I raised earlier. I think democracy is always fraught. I think we could agree or disagree about whether this particular moment is different, that we're on a cliff, we're on a precipice. But there are always going to be challenges. There are always going to be challenges bubbling up from below, different groups in society wanting more, different groups changing, the population changing. Democracy is not a static concept. It's fluid. And you have to try to think about what democracy means today and in the future, and not necessarily what it meant 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It's going to be different because the country is different, the population is different. There are flavors of democracy. There's not just one democracy out there. And we have to choose at what point do we want this democracy. Some people on the right think that a much more aggressive president and a presidential directed democracy is a better one for any number of reasons. A lot of people push back against that, right? A lot of people with more traditional notions. If we look at the Constitution, if we look at what the founders thought, they thought that democracy was centered in Congress by far, that the legislative branch should be the central focus of what democracy is
That's
in the
why we
United
don't have a
States.
king, right?
That has changed organically over time, that the administrative state has grown over the course of the 20th century because our problems have gotten much more complex. Congress can't do everything.
Right.
So lots of the problems have to get done by other actors that weren't even thought about when the founders were conceiving these things.
And as Congress works worse, the president gets more powerful.
Or
'cause
the
there's a
states
vacuum.
get more power, or
Yeah.
the courts get more power. Someone's gonna lurch into that vacuum, that power vacuum.
It seems, though, that right now a lot of Democratic voters, they want an executive that's just as powerful, just their own. I mean, we saw that some with Prop 50, this idea of fighting fire with fire, right? That we want our own Democratic fighter, not necessarily the same way as Trump,
Yeah.
but somebody to be our fighter.
I mean,
do you read it that way?
Newsom is acting very Trumpian in the
Very.
way that he's pursuing things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you could.
And his poll numbers have gone up.
Yeah.
His social media numbers have gone up. His
Sure.
fundraising has gone up.
and
in
it's
doing that.
It's very in keeping with his personality. He doesn't have to. Pretend, right? It's very much in keeping with his personality. I mean, one way of reading Prop 50 is let's stick it to Trump. Another reading is let's fight back against what's happening in Texas. Let's ignore what was trying to happen in New York.
Well, they
before
say
that,
those
but
are the two same things.
Yeah.
They say Trump's responsible for Texas.
another way to read it is let's disenfranchise Republicans in California.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody talks about that, but that's what happened.
That's
right?
what happened. It's a gerrymander in
Now
California.
you might say it's for a greater good, a bigger prospect, but that's what happened.
Right. On the democracy thing, because there's a big question of when will Congress push back against Donald Trump? Will Republicans push back against Donald Trump? And we saw an example of that today with the Epstein vote. Now,
We saw them say no to filibuster reform.
yeah,
Getting rid
they
of the
said no to filibuster reform. In Indiana, they said no to gerrymandering so far. But this Epstein vote is the news of the day. And obviously, President Trump put out a statement a couple of days ago saying, "Go vote for it." After it was clear that they were going to lose the vote and he was going to be embarrassed. So now he's not as embarrassed because he told them. But it's clear that Republicans were pushing back on him, at least a few of them. And these were real MAGA people. I'm curious, Mike, your thoughts on the significance of that. Is that a real breaking point? Is this a significant inflection point in the Trump administration, or is this just one particular story that's especially interesting because of Epstein to a lot of people, but is not part of a broader narrative?
Well, I don't know. I think Ed might have a better sense of what's going on with the. I guess, Mike, quickly, what I would say is look, I think it's partly a function of this has been a central part of the MAGA coalition, this whole Epstein matter, and so that gives it a particular power. It's also coming after Trump looks weakened. With Jersey and Virginia and New York.
And the shutdown too.
Yeah.
Hurt his
So I don't know. As I say, I think someone like Ed, he's much smarter about Republicans than I am. He can probably give you a better answer.
Your thoughts?
Well, let me tell you the advice I'd give to Democrats. Maybe a little bit different. If they fight the campaign on issues, it's going to be a toss-up on how it turns out. Because people are split. We've spent so many years demonizing so many of these issues that it depends on what side of it you end up. A Democrat that I'm close to, in frustration, called me in January last year and said, "What would you do differently. We're struggling on what our message should be. And I said, well, the first thing I would do is not listen to any Democrat in Washington. The second thing I would do is pull together 4 or 5 of your governors, and you have some very good governors, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky. You can find some in the West. And I'd pull those governors together and say, put together a message for us on how you would govern. And make it not about issues, but make it about how you govern.
Right.
Because that is the weakness of Trump.
Right. And that's what I talked recently with Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky, one of the most popular Democrats in the country, in a red state, centrist, who says, make it all about the issues. How am I going to fix your roads? How am I going to solve your problems? And don't make it about all the rest.
But I'm saying even more than that.
Yeah.
Say, what is your approach on governing? People, the reason why we didn't have many senators as president is people vote for senators, congressmen, legislators based on, are you smart enough to legislate? They vote for mayors, they vote for governors, they vote for presidents based on, you're strong enough to govern and protect us.
Get things done. So what's the sentence?
Pardon me?
What's the sentence on governing? What is the campaign that you would write?
That's why I'm saying go to those governors that are governing well and have them put it into a message.
Yeah. What do you think it is?
Well, again, I'm going to take a little bit more of a dire view with all respect to Republicans like Ed and Mike Murphy, but I think we've got one pro-democratic party in America, not two.
Small D,
and I think we crossed that bridge when Republicans started denying what happened on January 6th, when most Congress people voted to support Trump, when they ran again in the big lie, denying what had really happened, when gerrymandering, which has been a bipartisan problem, really went berserk. I think there are millions of signs that Republicans no longer believe in a democracy that doesn't yield the result that they want. The attempted election tampering. And I think we're going to have more. And I think it's not a matter anymore of whether you prefer the policies of Democrats versus Republicans. It's like, how do we choose to be governed? What's the future of our democracy? And I think that it's a combination of cultural anxiety, racial anxiety, a latent authoritarianism, or not so latent among a lot of the Republican base, is such that the Republican Party, as constituted, cannot be trusted with our future. And so I agree with Mike that the future of democracy is very much a part of this. But I also think that there has to be an uplifting message on how we govern, how we are governed, and how we make this an inclusive country where people really feel that they have a stake, not simply in how we are governed as a democracy, but whether there is a place in the future for kids and grandkids more secure than it appears to be now.
Ed, do you think that's fair that the Republicans are anti-democratic? Small d.
I think it's not fair at all. It may be anti-democratic amongst a certain president of the United States, but it's not true of the general Republican voters. I think there's a deeper problem, and I keep hearing redistricting popping up. Redistricting is not the problem we have today. The problem we have today is after 30 years of negative campaigning, and I like to look at non-presidential years for turnout. In 1990, 35% of Republicans voted in the Republican primaries, and 35% of Democrats voted in Democrat primaries. You know what it was in 2022? 15% of the Democrats and 17% of the Republicans. Only the hardcore far right and far left are all that's voting and participating in what's there. And the bulk of this country, which is centrist, maybe center right, maybe center left, but it's the bulk of this country, 65% of this country, are not being represented by who's being sent to them to vote in the general election. That's the problem we have. We have to get back to getting more people participating, not in electing the people, but on picking the nominees that they then choose to pick from.
And you think
I agree with that. The New York Times did a survey recently, and at most in the last elections, there were maybe 30, 35 districts out of the 435 in Congress that were genuinely competitive, as within 3, 4, 5 points. So what Ed said is exactly right, because
and 5 of them were in California, which just got knocked off the board.
and so who were our candidates? Our candidates are either far left or far right or very progressive, and it matters less whether you can appeal to the center or whether you can win a primary. And that really is a function of gerrymandering, I think. It's getting worse and worse and worse.
And the thing that makes it confusing, and you see this from a polling standpoint, we had a polling question we asked, 2 questions. We asked, do you want your member of Congress to fight over values, even if it means they do not solve any problems? 71% of our sample said yes. We then went in and asked them, the same group of people, do you want your member of Congress to compromise on values in order to find solutions to what we deal with every day? 75% said yes. Now, Celinda Lake, who I did a lot of the national polling with, was very fond of saying, voters hold contradictory opinions, and they get really pissed off if you point it out to them. So we never have, but what we did was we did what we call a forced choice, where we put both of those in the same question. It came out 70% compromise, 27% fight. But guess who that 27% is? It's who's voting in the 2 primaries of the 2 parties.
Mike, your campaign in 2020 got the most votes of any campaign ever. Of the people that are being talked about now, or maybe people that aren't being talked about now, who's the most natural successor to President Biden to be able to put that coalition back together? Who do you think is that bridge from President Biden that would best be able to do that again?
I don't know. I mean,
Is there anybody that's especially impressing you right now?
well, look, I think the world of Vice President Harris. I mean, I know there's we Democrats are very difficult on people who run and don't win. But I actually thought she ran a really good campaign. I think one of the people who is really, I think is underestimated, who would have a really powerful candidacy would be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I think she would be a very strong candidate in the primary.
Even though she feels different than the
In a presidential primary, yes.
Yeah.
I think.
You think she could win a general election, though?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah. And I think, look, but look, and you have to look at people like Shapiro, who's, an incredible governor. Look, Newsom has obviously had a very strong, I mean, look, to be honest, I've sort of retired. So I don't really.
How is that? What's retirement like?
You know what? At first it kind of bothered me, but I'm starting to get to like it. But I do think, but on a serious note, look, I think there's going to be a huge fight in the party between what I would sort of say is kind of more the establishment wing. That'll be Shapiro and, maybe Buttigieg is in there. But there, and then I think there's going to be a huge force coming from the left. I think AOC is probably the strongest person there. And then I think there's going to be a kind of a showdown, and so who would be the best person to, look, one thing that I think will happen is to go to I think Richard's point is the party's going to turn the page. It's going to move on. And look, I'm sure I'm not thinking. Look, I'm sure I'm not thinking about people. People like Westmore are incredibly talented. Whitmer obviously is a big governor in a big state. So I don't know. I probably shouldn't be rambling on because I haven't given it that much thought.
Speaking of retirement, how is President Biden doing? How's he doing physically? How's his health? We send him our love. And how is he adjusting to retirement?
I think he's doing pretty well. He's going through a round of treatment, and I talk to him several times a week. He's in good spirits. He's sharp. He's writing a book. He's done a few speeches, not a lot. I think if you've seen, there's been a handful of videos and photos of him on social media, and I think he looks pretty good. Look, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. If you're going to look at Joe Biden and Donald Trump and decide that Joe Biden is the guy with the cognitive problems in this country, I honestly, I don't see how you can see the world that way. Okay, and that was true. Look, I said it, by the way, I said in 24 that I thought Biden was the best person to be president in 24, and I thought he would have been the best person to be president through 28. And I didn't see anybody in the party or in the country who I thought could have done a better job. And one of the things I'll say about him is I think what Joe Biden did in getting elected in 2020 in this country ought to be seen more clearly for what it was, which was, we came, people forget it. He took the oath of office 2 weeks after January 6th, in the exact same spot where the mob had rioted on the west steps of the Capitol. Mm-hmm. Okay. And he spent the next 4 years bringing the country back. And the democracy which could have been lost that day wasn't. We completely underestimate and tend to forget what COVID did to this country and how hard it was to lead the country in the wake of COVID. And he left the country with the strongest economy in the world. So I'm biased, obviously, but those are facts.
And if you have questions, start lining up at the microphone. There are some people that say that Trump's actually stronger now because he went away, was able to regroup, because he's come back with a different administration, and that he's stronger now than he would have been if he would have won in 2020. What do you say to that?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, there's like 3 other folks here.
Yeah.
Sorry. I feel like I'm dominating.
Yeah, sorry.
I don't want to do that.
I'll answer that.
Yeah.
I don't think he is.
Yeah.
Quite frankly. And it goes to the governance part of this. You have in the Republican Party a lot of Republicans that like his policies, but they really don't like his character.
Yeah.
And if the focus becomes his character, it's going to be very dangerous for Republicans.
Yeah. All right.
I think the answer is yes, by far.
You think? Say that again.
So I think that during his first term, he wanted to do things, and there were people around him who told him he couldn't and he shouldn't. And he got rid of those people. And he has people around them who help him do those things. And he had 4 years away to think about what went wrong and what he could do. I think he's now he may be less popular with members of the Republican Party and the establishment, but the degree to which he can do things, and people may say do harm, is much greater today.
But let me tell you something he's done, and I'm very much against executive orders, the way it's been abused in recent years. And the reason why I'm against it is because in order to find solutions, you have to get both sides to sit down and agree there's a problem in the first place, and agree and find common ground on we want to address that issue. And then you can look at everyone's various issues and how you're going to address that issue or a combine of the two. Executive orders does away with that.
Right.
And so while you can force the issue sometimes in terms of making those things go through, that's about ready to end in about a year.
Right. And President Biden doesn't get enough credit for infrastructure and chips and science and other things that he did where he actually did bring both sides together.
Push back one small point.
Okay.
If the problem from his perspective is executive agencies are controlled by left-wing nuts,
Right.
I'm going to do this. I'm going to break them apart.
Yeah.
And I'm going to break them apart. And if the courts tell me that I can't do it, that's X number of months into the future. And these things will be broken.
Right.
And somebody's going to have to do the hard work of putting it back together. But that's a solution to a policy problem.
If you think the government doesn't work, then you can prove it.
But here's the other thing about this, which is,
But
look,
that's also what he's done. I think people have
Yeah.
missed the executive orders.
Yeah.
That the executive orders fall into two categories. One are things he wants to do and he thinks he can do, and things that he wants to do, but the courts were going to go against him and stop him. He is reaching a point that him bitching and moaning all the time about Biden is not going to go any further.
Doesn't work as much.
But what he's going to have is the legal system to complain about and make the bad guy.
Yeah. So we're going to try to get in. A lot of people want to ask questions. My request, if it's like a sentence with a question mark at the end, and not a personal story, so we can try to get as many of these as we can. Let's start here.
Hello, my question for you guys today is looking at democracy and how it started. In the beginning, it started with check and balances, making sure that no one branch has too much power. Looking at how checks and balances is today, do you think it has failed in the US government with Donald Trump having so much power and being able to pass so many things through Congress?
Who wants to take that?
I'll try. I think in the abstract, checks and balances is a great system. Now, mind you, the executive expanded in such periods as the Depression, where we needed a strong executive. And clearly that's changed with the growth of administrative agencies. But I think what has really happened is that in reality, Congress and the Supreme Court have failed to play the role that they should have. So Congress has failed to object when Trump simply reallocated money or demolished agencies established by law. I think the Supreme Court has facilitated authoritarianism. I think one of the worst rulings since the Dred Scott decision is Trump versus the United States in 2024, which basically licensed authoritarianism. So what has happened is that the institutions as designed are fine. The people who occupy them have failed miserably. And we're going to have to find a way to reinvigorate those institutions because the two of the three have failed us and we're left with Project 2025 and Donald Trump.
Which is why the midterms are going to be so important in 2026. And we'll see if there's a Democratic House, what that pushback looks like. Yes.
First, is this on?
Yes.
I just wanted to say, Mr. Donilon, I totally agree with. I think President Biden's going to go down in history as certainly the best president in my lifetime. We have to get through this, But and I actually was quoted in the New York Times criticizing George Clooney for a guy who didn't give any money to the campaign, by the way, having been one of the top fundraisers for Biden. But I was going to ask a different question, but based on what you just said, in response to that question, I want to ask a different question, which is, do any of you have any thoughts or ideas how and why Roberts has gone full MAGA? I mean, I know he's always been conservative, of course, but there was some hope that he would guide the court in at least a better way than he has, and he really has gone full MAGA. I'm just wondering if any of you have any insights into what on earth has happened to this guy.
Well, I've written about him, and this is not new. He's been an ideologue since the early 80s, right, when he was really so obsessed with race as an issue or affirmative action as an issue. If you look at 2010, he maneuvered the Citizen United opinion to be way bigger and more dramatic than it was. If you look at 2013, where he basically gutted the pre-clearance protections against voter suppression laws in southern states. He'd been raving about that for 30 years. And then he says, oh, well, the South's improved. Like the South apparently improved over his entire lifetime. And then we had 2018, where he says, well, gerrymandering, geez, we can't touch that. So he aggressively guts our campaign finance laws. He strips the civil rights laws of great protection. And then he says, well, gerrymandering, geez, I'm sorry. And then he comes back and says, and oh, by the way, there should be an all-powerful executive that is virtually legally unaccountable. This is not some shock that this institutionalist has just betrayed democracy. He's been this guy for 40 years. He's been this guy since he became Chief Justice in 2005. So I found that opinion kind of shocking. But as I looked at his evolution, he has helped the Republican Party and helped the cause of diminishing democracy through his entire tenure as Chief Justice.
Does anybody disagree with that, the idea that he's full MAGA?
I don't think he's full MAGA, but he's certainly looked that way from time to time.
Yeah. Next question.
So, this next question is kind of, it's a question that I want you guys to legitimately answer and then think about when you go home, especially looking at how much of the younger audience is left. Don't you think the messaging problem with the party is most of what you guys talk about is Trump? Most of what you guys talk about is Trump and not necessarily what you are going to do for the American people, let alone the younger generation that's going to take up after you guys. I want you guys to legitimately answer that now, but like I said, think about that because a lot of these young kids, I can speak as someone who's 31 and been in politics for a long time. The reason I left is because there's too much talk about him and not, okay, he's there, cool, but we're going to talk about what we're going to do and we're going to talk about how to provide real-time solutions and tell you what we're going to do for you, Americans, not Republicans, not Democrats, but people.
Anybody want to take that one? Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously, Trump's going to die someday. I mean, this is not ultimately about Trump. And I would say even that Trump is more a product of dysfunction in the country than the cause of it. We need to promise young people a future. And the polling that suggests that parents of young people no longer believe their kids will be better off, that young people are facing a tough job market. I think we really need to speak to the needs, the needs of people in their daily lives. And to the extent that we talk about Trump or exclusively Trump, that's really not the problem we're going to be dealing with going forward, so much as the future of our democracy and also the future of whether we have an economy and society that delivers for the people who have a right to depend on it.
Yeah.
I would agree with that, but I always say Trump is not the disease. He's a symptom of the disease this country has. And until we start realizing that, we're not going to straighten the ship. Is that we have to deal with all of it. And all this talk about the parents not believing their children to do as well, that's because they're not doing as well as they thought they would be here. Well, it's not driven by their children, it's driven by their experience. And that needs to be understood on people that address that issue.
And part of it also, I think, is going to be the next generation understanding how to harness social media to bring up other topics and effectively communicate with people. We saw Mandani, regardless of whether you like him or dislike him, did that really effectively. I mean, he used TikTok as a way to speak directly to people about affordability issues that wasn't just about Trump. And the candidates that are able to do that and get some following that way, I think are going to be effective. Because right now, part of the reason the media talks about Trump so much is because he rates better. I mean, he rates better. The stuff about him does better. It gets more clicks online. It gets more stuff on TV. I mean, he understands how to get people to pay attention. And in an attention economy, it has been good business for people to cover him. And that's part of the reason why they talk about him so much. Back to my car chase thing. Yeah.
One issue I think for young people that is rarely talked about is we have an aging population. We have a lot of older people
living healthier and longer, and they're expensive. And they vote,
Yep.
and they think about what's best for them. And increasingly, they are demanding more out of young people, indirectly, not because of some vile plan.
Right.
But young people are going to have to spend more and more taking care of older people.
And decisions are made by those who show
And
up.
we have a place like, I grew up in Chicago. Chicago is virtually bankrupt because of having to pay for a lot of people who are retired, pensioners and whatnot. And it's not going away, and there aren't good answers outside of bankruptcy, maybe.
But if you look at the 2020 versus 2024 election, you saw a huge shift among young voters. If young voters had voted in the percentage for Harris and or in the turnout level that they did for Biden, she would have been elected president. And in 2020, I mean, I thought Biden spent a lot of time in his presidency on issues of concern to young people, whether it was, climate, which, Trump is kind of systematically undoing, whether it was a very aggressive, college debt relief program, whether it was expanding health care to the biggest percentage. So there was you reclassified marijuana. And young people move pretty dramatically.
Yeah.
In 24 now, I gather that's inflation, cost of housing. And if you look at the results out of Virginia, Jersey, New York, they're moving again. So look, young people are engaged, following it, they're looking at it. I do think the thing about Mondami that is important. And I think it's what AOC has. An ability to speak in an information environment and be heard.
Yep.
And to generate real interest and excitement.
Can I throw something out for the students?
Yeah.
On the exit polling, throw it out the door. It's not worth the paper it's written on. It's based on who voted this election year. And you had 5 million votes less vote on the Democratic side, 2 million more on the Republican side. And guess what was comprised in that 5 million? A lot of young voters, a lot of Hispanic voters, a lot of African-American voters. So of course the exit polls showed him doing better, but was it a shift to him? No, it was what he did on election day of those people that turned out.
Maybe not a realignment. Last question right here.
So for my question, I'm sure everybody on stage could answer it real well, but I'm particularly interested in Mike and Ed's take, just because of all the Biden talk, as well as kind of how you tied things to history. So in the first question they were asking regarding the checks and balances, Richard kind of mentioned how the roles of Congress and the roles of the courts have been kind of failing a little bit. And I'm kind of curious, what do you think the role of like modern day president should be? Like what, obviously many people might say that the current president oversteps his role a little bit and does more than what should be expected. But what should our appropriate expectations be for our modern day president now?
Good question.
Realize when you're president of all the people. And one of the things I've seen over the years, and I'm 73, I've worked in politics since I was 11. So I've done it a long time. There are very few people, and you don't see it with congressmen, but you see it with governors, you see it with presidents. They can just see when they take the oath of office, it's like a light goes off, that they understand they are now representing all the people. Happened with every president I've ever watched except for one.
Huh. Barack Obama? No, just kidding. Mike, last word to you. How do you see the proper role of the American president?
I think the proper role is to recommit themselves to what I think is a presidency of limited powers and an effort to work with Congress and a respect for rule of law and Constitution And I think those are pretty basic values and a pretty, look, I think it is, I think it's been one of the things that has been pretty common to every president, Republican and Democrat, until Trump, where I think he has aggressively kind of veered off what I think has been the proper role of the presidency.
Well, I just want to say the proper role of the audience is what you guys have done. You've been so fantastic in listening, being respectful. Thank you all for being so candid and insightful. Really enjoyed this conversation and really enjoyed all of you. Fight on. We got more great stuff to come, but thank you so much for being so kind to us. And thank you all for what you've done. Thank you.